This is Rob Sheridan, and you are watching the TV Writer Podcast.
I want to welcome new primary sponsor, the Blue Cat Screenplay Competition. Blue Cat is now open to submissions for the 2023 competition. The Blue Cat Screenplay Competition has been discovering and developing new storytellers for over 25 years to help new writers get a foothold in the industry. When you submit to Blue Cat, you're guaranteed a thorough read of your script with a written analysis of your submission at no extra fee. Blue Cat believes in supporting writers with more than just an opportunity at the cash prizes, but with feedback to guide each entrant to grow and develop. Blue Cat winners and finalists often make valuable connections in the industry, which help them begin professional careers. In addition, the 5 cash prizes total $18,500 this year. Send in your feature screenplay, TV pilot, or short film script when you're ready. The competition's deadline is October 30th, but if you miss it, you can still catch the late deadline on December 11th. This is Gray, and you're watching the TV Writer Podcast, partner of Script Magazine, episode 133 for October 18th, 2022. Well, today I have the pleasure of interviewing somebody who's risen to the ranks in Canadian TV and then done the same in the States. So I think you're going to appreciate the broad perspective he has on both of these industries. I want to welcome Rob Sheridan. How you doing, Rob?
Thanks. I'm Greg. Very nice to see you. We were just having a quick chat before we started. We realized we have a little shared history. So, and here we are, only mayhaps 20 miles apart from one another. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
I'm in around basically Van Nuys. So. Yeah.
Very cool. And I did want to do a side note that I have interviewed a lot of Canadian writers over the years and showrunners, including Jana Senior, Sherry Elwood, Matt McLennan, Karen Walton, Will Pascoe, of course, Brent Piaskowski last week. And so if viewers want to just go directly to those Canadian interviews, and go to tvwriterpodcast.com and scroll down to the tags, and there's a tag for Canadian TV writers, and you'll get a whole pile of them.
Well, everybody you just mentioned is terrific. So, I'll have to do a deeper dive myself as well.
Yeah. And we were just talking, and we were at York University at the same time and had a very similar trajectory. Why don't you talk about that? You came to York for production. Where did you grow up, and what led you there?
So I just grew up in Scarborough, and I was like, boy, I've had enough of Scarborough. Let's go to Downsview. Those first couple of years, York had a fairly reputable film program, and those first couple of years I was literally just commuting, and then eventually I moved into a house with a bunch of guys fairly close to campus, but it was sort of a hit and miss experience there. I think at the time, having had a lot of friends who went away to school and just further away from home. There was a time when I felt like, oh, geez, I wish I'd done that. But I made the most of my time at York, and I did lots of different stuff, and just working on campus. And I worked at a pub, and I worked at the radio station, and had kind of an all-around kind of experience there. But like you, I think was in sort of production for the first year of it, sort of film production. And then, when you're shooting student films, especially in Canada, you're shooting them in the winter. You're not, nobody's shooting in like June or July, and you're out there freezing your butt off. And I at the time, I had very little patience for the sort of technical aspects of it, and I don't know, it seemed tedious and expensive. And I just remember going to my to one of the one of the coordinators of the program, a guy named George Robinson, who I remember well, and I don't know if he's still with us or not, but. And I said, I really love writing, but the rest of this is just, so there was actually a friend who was a little bit sort of on the bubble as to terms of whether or not there was a spot for him the following year. And so I said, well, just give him mine and I'll just keep writing. And then after that, I did do screenwriting. I don't know that I learned a ton about the craft particularly. I felt like a lot of what I learned probably I could have picked up anywhere, and in some cases maybe some better stuff. But I always considered it just a fairly decent kind of liberal arts education, and I took a lot of. I read, just a lot of lit classes and philosophy, whatever the hell I could get my hands on that I felt like I could do without failing out, and that was it, and I had a really good time. But I would say there was a gap after that, and then I wound up working as a publicist for just kind of falling backward into a job out of school. In the mailroom of Garth Drabinsky's old theater company.
Oh,
if you
wow.
remember Drabinsky. Yeah. So I got a job in the mailroom and wound up working in the publicity department for a few years. Not like corporate publicity, so I didn't have to answer the phones when the fraud came down. But I show stuff, and I got to tour and travel, and it was fun. And I was writing a little bit. In fact, I wrote a couple of little stories for Playbill, and I did obviously I was writing a lot of press releases and stuff. So I was realizing that I was good at writing, but I really was not on any particular path, and just kind of drifting. I think one of the best things that ever happened to me was the company went down in flames, and the RCMP showed up and started seizing boxes, and the rest is history. And Garth eventually went to prison for a short period of time, about 10 years later. But yeah, that was sort of a kick in the pants, and then a couple other things, and then I went to the Canadian Film Center in 2001 and did sort of a TV writing kind of crash course there. I think the program's maybe a little bit longer than it was then, but I did learn a lot, and more importantly, met a lot of folks who've remained friends, and that felt I was already 30, or I just turned 30. And so it was kind of a fresh start, maybe a little older than I would have wanted, but then I kind of, from there on, I didn't sort of look back. I was like, I could write TV, I think, and I did.
So, the Canadian Film Center program, I actually wasn't aware that they had a TV side. I thought it was more features, but did that lead fairly directly to you getting on staff? Was it like some of the fellowship programs here where they sort of get you connected, or how did you get that first staff job?
It did, in a way. I mean, for any anybody US watching or anything like that, there are similarities between, say, the Canadian Film Center and AFI. Now, it's a much smaller operation. But some terrific people were there at the time, and it was called the Primetime Writing Program, and it was really modeled after a writer's room, and there were two groups of writers, and one was doing a 1 hour and one was doing a half hour, and I was in the half hour group. There was a couple of showrunners, Bill Lauren and Glenn Davis, who had worked on, in the sort of late 90s Canadian television. You'll see their names pop up a lot on shows like Power Play and Kung Fu. The Kung Fu reboot, but they a lot of genre stuff. But really, they hadn't really done sort of sitcom, but they were really funny, and so we worked on this project, which ostensibly was sort of being developed for Comedy Network, and like most things, never really went anywhere. But it was a great learning ground. And then really, to be fair, right out of there, people would come and speak to us, and we didn't have a lot of comedy people coming in, because there wasn't a lot of comedy being made, really. I mean, that's still sort of sometimes the case, but so what happened was that Dave Smith, who was one half of SNS Productions, who made the Red Green Show with his brother Steve Smith, who played Red Green, and was going into its 10th or 11th season on CBC. It was kind of an institution by this point. A show I had never really watched much of. I mean, I was sort of a younger guy, but I kind of got the hang of, and I just felt like, well, I made an effort to kind of get to know Dave, because I just thought, well, here's an opportunity, and as luck would have it, sent them a script after graduation, and Steve liked it, and then I came in, and then I wound up writing a bunch of stuff for him, and that continued for years. Cool. Yeah, that was my first TV writing job for sure. And I was writing 2-3 page scripts. The show was sort of written in segments, and it ate up a lot of material. And Steve is an incredibly prolific, kind of genius guy, really. And and it was hard to keep up with him. Not that I had to. I mean, he was the one doing most of the heavy lifting, but it was a great first job, actually.
Was there a room, or how was it written?
Not really. No, it was more like, if anybody's ever seen the Red Green Show, it's sort of almost like a sketch sitcom hybrid. There's no fourth wall, and Red is always talking to the audience. And I always likened it more to like the Jack Benny Show or something like that. Like, you've got a bunch of writers who are mostly trying to please the one guy, but he really, we were basically emailing stuff in, and I remember I was still on dial-up. It was like I'd finish a script and then it would take like 20 minutes to send it to him. But he really, every now and again, the other writers and I would sort of put, could we all get together, and wouldn't it be fun to all get together in a room and share ideas? And we did, but in the end, it was just like, there was no time. It was just like, you just had to generate stuff and kind of keep going. And I didn't really get the writer's room experience on that, that I did later on more sort of quote unquote, I don't know, conventional scripted shows. But yeah, where you had like, a real room going.
And how and when did you get representation? And maybe you can, I don't know if you can articulate what the differences might be in the U.S. and Canadian industry regarding representation.
Yeah, I feel like, so much has probably changed, more so than I even know. I mean, I can't tell anymore, but it's funny because I had met partly through the primetime program at CFC. We got sent out to the Banff TV Festival that year, and I think we had to pay something. I don't remember what it was, but it was like some kind of deal. And I met a guy named Glenn Coburn, who was an agent at that time with Characters in Toronto, and then later started his own agency called Meridian Artists. And Glenn and I kind of hit it off on that trip. And I didn't have an agent, when Steve Smith gave me an offer to write them a few scripts. So I just called Glenn, having been the only agent I'd really met at that point, and said, listen, I'm getting $300 a pop for these, but if you want 10% of it, you can pretend to be my agent. I'd be doing a solid. And he said, I'll see if I can't get the 10% up. I'll see if I can't get 10% over, so it'll cover my commission. I don't remember if he did or not. But after that, that was basically it. It was sort of a handshake deal, and remains since, because he has repped me in sort of a managerial capacity while I've been down here the last 12 years. But in total, we've been together for more than 20 years.
Wow.
So that was always really important to me. I liked having that continuity, and he and I got on well. And then by the time I decided to try my hand, I'd been working in Canada for about close to 10 years at that point, 8 or 9 anyway. Red Green, worked on Little Mosque on the Prairie for a couple of years at CBC, did a year on Corner Gas, which was a ton of fun. The credit, people can IMDb the credits, but I was working a lot, which was terrific. But I was having trouble. It seemed like I just couldn't, in terms of trying to get a pitch going or get a development deal going. There was things here and there, but I was kind of being frustrated a little bit in my sense of, maybe I'm kind of starting to hit a ceiling here. So, we came down in 2010, and Glenn, God bless him, and I was, I was in a good position at the time. So I just come off a Little Mosque as co-EP there. So. I wound up meeting with all the big agencies here. Again, this is one of those perfect kind of real just moments in your career where, if you kind of miss that window, it could pass. But for that time when we came down here, we met with pretty much every major agency and a bunch of boutiques. So we kind of had our pick. And then I was at WME for years, and then when the Writers Guild kind of went to war with the agencies over the whole packaging stuff, I left. I had to quit. A lot of people were firing their agents, so I fired WME. My agent left. He went off and started doing something else, so I'm not there. So I'm not at WME anymore. And for the time being, I've been doing a lot of, just did a lot of development work up in Canada the last couple of years. So that's sort of been the focus again. So in a way, I've sort of come full circle. But anyway, short version is I had a very fortunate time of it, I think, in terms of finding rep, just heading it off with Glenn, my first rep, and then just, being at a time in my career where, it doesn't mean you're a superstar. It just means, oh, well, this guy's making money right now. So maybe we can, and then you do that for a few years. And,
You want to know how to get an agent? Have dollar signs.
That's pretty much, that's everything, right? It's just why, that's why anything ever happens in this town. And, we were, my partner Annie and I were watching the latest Halloween movie last night, which has just come out. And I was like, I reviewed people like, this movie's not very good. I'm like, well, of course it's not very good. It doesn't need to exist. None of these movies need to exist. And they wouldn't if they didn't, they don't even make money. If it stops making money, they'll stop making the movie. It is one thing almost has nothing to do with another. It's just what's the perceived dollar value on anything at any given time. And, where do we go from there?
Yeah. Well, can you speak a little bit to the sort of differences in the Canadian model versus the U.S. model, particularly with regard to, number one, development, because I think there's a lot of similarities between the two industries, but development is a big difference between those two, and also sort of the view of show running and that sort of level with the Canadian networks.
Yeah, I feel like I've spent half my adult life talking about this in a way. It's like it was a constant frustration, and partly the reason that I did come down here. And I've had this frustration since. And it depends on the network and it depends on the executive. There's some fine people working everywhere. But yeah, I think in general, the idea of what a showrunner actually is and does and where that buck stops to an extent. Now, listen, there's not a showrunner alive unless you're down here and you're somebody who's powerful enough to have a wall around them. You're Larry David or you're Chuck Lorre or you're, maybe Lena Dunham. I don't know who it is. But if you're somebody who's kind of in that position, that's great. There's always a lot of meddling. But I will say you need a centralized kind of, someone needs to be the head sort of creative voice on a show. And I do think there's been a tendency in Canadian networks to sort of undervalue the showrunner. It's very much a kind of I was going to say gangbang. That's sort of an unsavory, but there's a lot of people attacking, one a piece of work. So I'm not expressing myself very well on this, but there's a difference. There's a difference. And let me put it this way. Here's an example. A couple of years ago, I was working on a development project for one of the Canadian networks with some talent, and I was up. I happened to be in Montreal doing some work on Just for Laughs. I'd go up and write on the galas there and whatnot. And we were having some trouble with the talent. We were having troubles with the creative sort of direction of the show. And I had asked, well, can we sort of try and sort this out? But when I went to the network to sort of express myself on this, there didn't seem to be a whole lot of interest in terms of what it was. And when they went on and had a meeting with the parties in question, and they came back and I said, well, how did that go? They said, oh, well, it's fine. And they kind of blew me off. And I said, I'm the person who's going to be running this show. If this thing goes, it's important that you actually tell me what goes on. There was a kind of it just reminded me that there's just not a ton of sort of respect for the showrunner.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, and it is kind of fascinating. And I've heard that a lot. There's almost an idea that the showrunner can be, and like you said, it's not across the board, but almost like more of a head writer rather than the
it's this
showrunner.
head writer business, and I worked with a non-writing producer on Little Mosque on the Prairie, and I think that person probably thought they were the showrunner. But as my friend, the late great Dennis McGrath, used to say, showrunners are writers. Showrunners are writers. Showrunners are writers. Showrunners are not non-writing producers. They are people who are there in the room doing the hard work all the time. Anybody else is just getting in your way. And so I feel very strongly about that. I think that, again, those are experiences. I'm also talking about some experiences that happened 10, 15 years ago. There are a lot of terrific people working at every level, and there are some executives that is particularly, some of the people who work in some of the streamers now, and there's a maybe new streams opening up. I don't mean streams just necessarily literal streams, but yeah, just streams of content. So I don't mean to sound pessimistic, but yeah, that was challenging. And everything down here is extremely challenging in its own way too. But I if I had one sort of thing that stuck in my craw over the years, I did a year on. I'll just say this: I did a year on Corner Gas, which, as I said about a guy like Chuck Lorre or somebody like that, Brent and I think Mark Farrell and all the people who were the senior writers on that show were doing a good enough job, and I think they had very smart executives working at Bell at CTV at the time. And more or less, there was more a wall around that show. And whether you liked the show or not, a lot of people did. I thought it was very funny. But even if you didn't like the show, it was the vision and the voice of a very specific, right? Like Brent, that was Brent and Mark and a lot of what Brent had brought to that from his own experience, his own sensibility. That was that show where, as I say, there was a little bit of a wall around the creative. It's not that the network didn't have notes, but they were sparing with them. Versus a year later, when I left that show to go work on Little Mosque on the Prairie, when you had about 1,001 fingers in the pot at any given time, the proof is in the pudding. Look at the shows, right? One of them is funny, one of them isn't. That's true. I mean, it just is. It's just Little Mosque has some smiles, and but it was a third the show that the Corner Gas was, I think, comedically and everything else, and you're working your butt off to sort of get it there, and you're constantly meeting that resistance. So it was within about a year of that I moved down here. Boy, I sound bitter, don't I? Never ends. No, but I'm also very tired. I had a rare. This doesn't happen to me as often as it used to when I was younger, but I had a rare sort of 2 a.m. Creative burst last night at an idea, and I thought that I had to get down, and I almost never do that anymore. But then all of a sudden, I looked up and it was 4:30 in the morning. So if I start to repeat myself and I get a little dizzy, just flag me before I fall over.
Yeah, well, it's actually very interesting. I mean, I've been doing this podcast since 2010, and in the last 12 years, I mean, really, when I started, one of the things I did when I started is I interviewed a whole bunch of Canadian writers. I had a little series of Canadian TV and sort of to compare and contrast the two industries. And it seemed at the time that the U.S. were these big rooms with the showrunner as the god, and the Canadian industry was smaller rooms with head writer and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And you think, wow, that could never happen in the U.S. But then the last couple of years, we're seeing smaller and smaller and smaller rooms. Disney's coming in and saying, well, the director's the auteur, so let's have a head writer again. And
100%.
I mean, it feels like it's happening here too.
It is. The rooms are getting smaller. The orders are getting shorter. It's like, all those mini rooms that I did to sort of that I worked in to sort of help cobble together a living in the 10 years I was working in Canada. There's a lot more of that now, and and a lot less financial stability. It's just yeah, and that part of it is really frustrating. And yeah, you know, the more money people are spending, the more hand wringing there's going to be. I mean, I get it. It's a business. People get nervous. And by the way, you know, for all of my whining about Canada, you know, I worked on a show 10 years ago in New York City for NBC called Next Caller with that Stephen Falk, who later ran You're the Worst, had created. We had Jeffrey Tambor was in it, Dane Cook, Colette Wolfe. Really good cast, huge show, big budget, enormous set, shipped out to Kaufman Astoria Studios. And they never left us alone. And we were absolutely, you know, I don't know if it was because the network and Lionsgate or whatever were on the other side of the country, but it was just a lot of fiddling. And we got canceled before we even wrapped. We never went to air. Wow. The show never aired. And I would go home at night, like, just thinking, Jesus, what are we even doing here? You know, I can't. It was unbelievable. So that is not border specific, but I think you're right in terms of the general, just kind of, yeah. There's I don't know. Look, there's a lot of great. There's more stuff being made. There's more interesting stuff being made. I mean, I don't want to sit here and pine necessarily for like a 20-year-old model, right? Mm-hmm. Where you got one guy, usually some old white guy, running a room full of a lot of other old white guys. And, you know, you look at a lot of the shows that were made when staffs were big, when there were basically only three or four networks, when people would more or less watch a test pattern on TV. Like, it always makes me think of this story of like the guys in the writer's room. And I just say guys because they probably were mostly guys, on Webster. Remember Webster the day with Emmanuel Lewis in the 80s? And they had some hot new ambitious network exec come in one day. This is like season 3, season 4. And she or he had a bunch of ideas as to how they could make the show better. And I was like, I really think if we implement these things, we can make this a great episode of Webster. And the guy turned to her and he said, look, there are no great episodes of Webster. There are no bad yet good. There are just Websters. Basically, it was like, we will keep turning out the same garbage. It's gonna get a 47 share or whatever, you know. Yeah. And we could all be out for happy hour 5 o'clock every Friday. And look, you know, the people who were around in those times, like 20, 30, you know, years ago, like, you know, those were really the salad days. And I'm envious. I'm jealous. Was the work great? Not really, right? Like a lot. Everybody remembers the stuff that works, that's classic. I mean, you remember the classics. You remember Cheers is a classic show. You know, Mary Tyler Moore, Taxi, whatever your kind of go-to kind of classic comedy is. But for every one of those shows, there were 20 just nonsense garbage shows that made 200 episodes and everybody got rich and, you know, they're still living on their residuals. So as a viewer and as an audience member now, and obviously as, you know, I think inarguably, I mean, these are two different things, but bringing more people to the table, bringing in those new voices has been by and large a hugely good thing. And a lot of these shows, I will say, you do a shorter order, there's maybe less money out on the table, but maybe somebody's willing to take a slightly bigger chance because there is less money involved, and then something really interesting gets made. And I think you see that, right? Like in a show like Rami or you know, I've got a couple of friends who work in Toronto on Sort of for Hulu, and I think it's going to HBO Max next year. Well, you know, just to take a couple of kind of shows with very specific voices, very diverse, but that's not really what makes them good shows. They're very clear articulations of you know. So I you know, I'm always aware that, you know, it's like, you go back to the good old days. The good old days weren't necessarily the good old days, and I am aware of that. So I think the business is just changing like everything else, and I do think kind of auteurs, which I don't really consider I'm not an auteur really. I'm a hired gun at the end of the day for the most part. But the auteurs will still find ways to get their stuff out there and have that power. So I'm not entirely pessimistic, but yeah, I wish I had been around at a time when you could just you and 15 other people could get on Webster and ride that out for 5 or 6 seasons. Yeah, I'd have done that.
Yeah, very cool. Well, let's talk just a little bit about your time in the States. You worked on some pretty big shows, Two Broke Girls,
Yeah.
Mad Love. I mean, a bunch of others. Catch me up. Talk about that time and what your experience was working here.
It's been generally very good. I mean, I think I was very nervous coming down. Not nervous. Well, no, I was nervous actually. I was going to say no, not nervous, but I was very nervous. In fact, I remember. I'm going to tell a very honest story because I think it'll be more helpful than the PR version. But just because, I don't want to sort of blanket over, how difficult these things can be, especially for people who do what we do and we're artists and writers and we're kind of sensitive people. When I first started coming down here, and I knew I really did want to make a go of it, but I was nervous. I'd never lived anywhere other than Toronto. I'd been on shows for 2 or 3 months in Montreal or Vancouver or wherever, but I was nervous about the move. And I was on, like every other writer worth his salt, an antidepressant, which they had stopped making. So I said, well, you're going to have to, this was an old pill, you've got to take it. So in the midst of doing this sort of slow move down here, I was flying back and forth a lot. And of course, I didn't have a green card or anything, so I couldn't just like park down here and move. But in the 6 or 8 months between sort of first getting the agent and then getting my first staff job, which was on a show called Mad Love, there was a lot of back and forth and a lot of traveling, and I was always kind of nervous on flights. And I was starting to have really panic attacks. There's no other way to put it. I was in between medications, and I was feeling a lot of unease, and I was just feeling really crummy. That was, that's a real thing, and it's very triggering if you're in a lot of writers can be very anxious people. And so when you enter, sort of Thunderdome, you're carrying that with you a little bit. And I think if I could go back, I wish I eventually did settle myself out, and things turned out well. But I wish I could have enjoyed that a little bit more, because it's very easy to get inside your head. And I also think that, I just wish I'd enjoyed the ride maybe a little bit more at the time. But so much of I think this business and every other business and life in a way is like trying to get that thing, and you think, if I get that thing, I'm going to be happy. But then ultimately what happens is, how do I hang on to this thing? Now I got to worry about that. Now that I've got the thing I want, I have to worry about losing it, right? I mean, that's sort of so yeah. There's no magic formula to it. But I take it on a case by case basis. Some things have been better than others. Some showrunners have been better than others. I was better on some shows than I was on other shows. I mean, I'll take as much heat as I need to for if there was ever something where I wasn't a perfect fit. But for the most part, I did in every room, at least with a couple of people. I got to work with a couple of folks who were really at the top of their game and learn a lot. And that part of it was super fun. And I have made some friendships here that I really cherish, and a lot of people that I used to see more of that I kind of miss. Just partly just since so many things have changed in the last few years. I don't have to tell you this, but yeah, between COVID and the going to war, as I say, with the the thing between the guild and the producer. So there's just been a lot of changes, and also I'm just getting older, and sort of finding what my voice is as an older writer versus a younger writer, whatever that means. So there's been, I can't say it's been like, all great or all bad, but it's just it's been dependent on the experience. But I've had some good ones. And sort of the last big one I worked on, as you mentioned, was Two Broke Girls, which, yeah, it was, I mean, in terms of having grown up wanting to work on a big time multi-camera show, that was sort of a dream come true. I didn't, again, I don't know, and I'll totally take. I don't know that I was necessarily exactly the right fit for that show. I sometimes feel like I could have done better. I always prided myself. I always used to pride myself on really being able to nail the voice of the show. And I think that's, if you can imitate, that's like 90% of the way there, right? Like I can remember when my first job on the Red Green show, and not having watched a ton of the show, but Steve sent me the scripts and I just sort of piled over and I'm like, okay, this is the voice. I can write this voice. And I've generally been able to do that. There've been some times when it was harder. Like I think Two Broke Girls, I did fine. It was fine. It was a lot of fun in the room and stuff. But yeah, it was just a little bit, I mean, again, it's just every show's kind of, it's not good or bad. It's just kind of everything's got its own wavelength. And it's your job to get on that wavelength. So if there was ever a time when I ever felt out of step, I'll always be like, well, that could just as easily have been me. But it was, so it was challenging. But at the same time, it was kind of the culmination of a effort to sort of get there. And then having gotten there, then thinking, okay, well, what's next? And that's sort of what I've been trying to answer for the last 5 years as I as I develop things and run things up the flagpole, and some things sell and some things don't, and still just kind of trying to cobble together a living. But a lot of what I've sort of I think whatever happiness or balance I've been able to find in the last few years has come much more from just sort of my life as opposed to the machinations of the industry, because those are things you just can't control,
Very cool.
Yeah.
That's a good point to take a break, to hear from our sponsors, and we'll be back to talk more about tips and that kind of thing. DrivingFootage.com provides 360-degree driving plates for film and TV. Over 14,000 clips are available for locations all around Southern California, with over 100 new cities from the U.S. and Canada coming in 2023. A fully equipped camera car with height-adjustable rig is available for custom shoots. Visit DrivingFootage.com for details. AVGearGuy.com uses state-of-the-art technology to bring new life to old films and videos, like the Lost Betty White series, Pet Set, which they recently restored for its 50th anniversary. They can apply the same technology to your documentary, film and video archive, and family videos. Visit AVGearGuy.com for details. Full disclosure, I do own both of these companies. By supporting them, you help me bring new in-person videos to you. And we're back to talk about tips and other stuff like that. So first off, I want to talk about the most important part, the script. When you're reading scripts from potential hires or in other things that you're doing, what are the things that you look for in a good script?
I think it's changed probably over the years. I think my own writing has probably changed as well in terms of my own samples. When I'm, if I'm the one going out for the gig, which is, but if I'm in a hiring place, for me, I guess at this point, I'm noticing things that feel, I don't know. It's a cliche to just say, well, I'm looking, you're looking for voice, but you are looking for voice. Something you feel like doesn't sound like this. It sounds like it's coming from some kind of lived experience in terms of how people actually live and relate to one another, as opposed to sounding like every other comedy that's, just to take one example. This is I don't want to pick on any one show, but just because I can say it because I don't know anybody on it. I was watching. There's some really good stuff in it, but we were watching A League of Their Own, the series. I was always a big fan of the movie, and there's some really good stuff in the series. But in the pilot, there was a very contemporary kind of slightly that kind of sitcom-y way that people have of talking to each other. It feels very written. It feels very scripted, And in that, it felt a little bit anachronistic just because of the time period of thing. And I guess more and more when I turn on a show these days, and I feel like all that kind of quippy, sarcastic retort theater sort of. I don't know. I've just grown bored with it. I'm like, is there something here that bears some resemblance to reality? Still funny. I mean, still jokes, but just like, yeah, I don't know. There's nothing funnier to me than just like a simple, like, I feel like the reason like Curb Your Enthusiasm still works after 20 years is, there's nothing funnier to me than just a simple fact stated clearly. If somebody's being a jackass, you're being a jackass, rather than, this is the worst in the time you went to blah, 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 reference. Just like people trying to get along with one another and failing. I don't know. These are comedy philosophies that mean nothing, but I just, something that just feels like it came from a real place. Look, I look back on early scripts that I wrote when we were at York, actually. And when I read, because I still have one somewhere around here, and I remember I used to have more of them, but I remember looking back at them like 10 or 15 years later, maybe after I'd started writing a little bit professionally, and obviously I didn't think they were. Obviously, I felt as though my writing had improved. Well, you would think it would, but what I really walked away with it from, or something like that, was. This feels like something that somebody's written who watches a lot of movies and TV shows. It felt like whatever little bit I had stolen from whatever it was I was watching at the time, right? Little Quentin Tarantino here, a little Woody Allen here, a little whatever and so you have to, obviously, over time you find your voice and hope that it's not too derivative. And so, I guess you're just always looking for voice, because that means a lot. And then secondarily, and almost as importantly, is the story hanging together? Is there outside, because obviously there can be great jokes and funny characters or whatever, but have they kind of landed? Did they stick the landing in the third act or whatever? So I mean, those are pretty basic things, but I would say that. And I would say the same thing about a script, any spec I wrote 20 years ago. I'm sure there are a lot of things that I did that I just wouldn't do now.
And I find that the shows, the comedies that really attract people are ones that feel like they're authentic from a certain point of view, like when you can feel that you're entering a world that is told from someone's point of view accurately. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, I think to take an example of a show I really do like, and I mentioned it once already, but sort of, which is about a young trans person, and it's it's about, as far as it's in a way, okay, it's about the trans experience, and it's about everything that maybe goes along with that, but it's really just about this character, and how interesting they are, and their attitude to the world and the characters around them. It's just a funny point of view, and irrespective of whatever the all the other dressings, it's like I feel like I'm watching real human beings when I watch the show, and that's relatable. Doesn't matter that the subject matter could be. It could be about anything, but if it feels, it's the same reason you can watch, you can be compelled by watching, a mobster movie even if you've never killed a guy. Like, I mean, we've all killed a guy, obviously, but lately. So no, I'm kidding. But when things feel real, that reaches you, I think, almost just like by osmosis. It's just like, okay, yeah, this is something I want to go back to, and that's what I find with the shows like that one. As I say, I just saw been catching up on Rami, and I think it's really good. There's just something with some specificity to it, I guess, like as you say.
Yeah, well, especially as the landscape is becoming a large number of small shows. It's very important that for those that there would be a very specific voice that attracts a specific range of people.
Yeah, and I mean, and I think it's Yeah, and in terms of, I just think there is more stuff being done. There's less money to be made on any given one show. That's true. But I do think creatively, in a way, it is kind of getting to what I always wished it was, which is less money spread around to more people, and then where do the gems, come from?
Mm-hmm.
And if you can, because not everything's going to be awesome, but it's nice when people get a shot to make something.
Mm-hmm.
Steve Smith, who I've come back to him a lot today, but my first boss in TV, his story about launching the Red Green Show, and he started it before it was at CBC. They started it at CHCH in Hamilton as an independent channel.
Wow.
Basically said, and he had made a lot of content, as we would say now, but he had already made about 200 or 300 episodes of TV for them with his wife. They'd done a couple of different sketch shows, but his story, and he always used to tell this during the warm up, was give me enough money to do something, but not enough that you care what it is. And I was like, if more TV shows got made that way, we'd actually be better off,
Yeah.
Because it's just like, just give me a few bucks and then leave me alone. And if it sucks, I won't bother you. If I get handed to you, you're not at that much money, and I won't bother you again. But do that as opposed to, let's make two things every year and micromanage them so carefully that we can't possibly go wrong.
Yeah.
And of course, that's exactly where you do go wrong.
It's funny you say that, because some of the most fun I've had is on the lowest budget shows. And there was one show I did in Canada where we submitted a rough cut, and you know how it works. Like, there's a rough cut, there's often rough cut 2, there's a fine cut, then fine cut 2, and the lock cut 2. There's like so many revision passes.
Right.
On this show, we submitted a rough cut, and the network notes were, "Looks great, lock it." Like, we didn't have to do any of these passes or anything like that. And it was the only show that flew me to halfway across the country for a wrap party, put me up in the posh hotel. Like,
oh, isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, they're doing a lot of that. Sounds like they're doing a lot of different things right. Yeah. I think at some point you just kind of have to, it's like Lorne Michaels always said about Saturday Night Live. It's like, we don't go on because we're ready. We go on because it's 11:30 and it's Saturday night. Like, there's a lot to be said for just kind of being creative and moving that as quickly, and as elegantly. But it just kind of keeps coming back to the same idea of having some of sort of the money people having faith in the creative people.
Mm-hmm.
But again, that's easier said than done.
Yeah. So what about behind the scenes? So you've talked about a lot of ups and downs in the industry, changing industry, some of the challenges that you had when you first moved here. What are some of your tips for even somebody who's starting out to be prepared for what they're going to face in the industry, and also to sort of upper levels when they hit those ebbs and flows?
Oh gosh, I don't know. Hold on for dear life, I guess. It's a lot of tenacity, and I think a lot of ambition, both of which I probably had more of 20 years ago than I do now. I don't know about you. I mean, it's not that I don't. I still have creative energy, but some of the there's a reason that a lot of the most people, the people that we consider to be sort of the top of their field, or the geniuses, whatever. There's a reason that a lot of that work gets done in people's 20s, 30s, 40s. It takes a lot of energy to kind of fight through that. But I think the people who there's nothing I could say to a young person starting out today that would be any smarter than anything they could tell me that would probably be more useful to me than what I could tell them. Like, I feel like they're gonna navigate it the way they're gonna navigate it, and I think there are way more opportunities now because people can't actually just go out there and shoot something and have it not be crummy, right? Like, I mean, have it actually look pretty good. I mean, I'm embarrassed when I think back to, we mentioned the late great Dennis McGrath. Did you know Dennis?
Yeah. Little bit.
Yeah, Dennis. When back when I was early 2000s, I think I was doing Red Green in a show. I was working on another show, and he was teaching a course at Ryerson, a TV writing course, just part time. And he had me come in to, like, I had like 2 credits, and I was like in there pretending I knew what I was talking about. But I remember like one of them saying, like some of the kids, well, what about, we were talking about, I was on the same cynical bent that I'm on now, which is just, oh, it's a bear and it's just hard to get people to get on it. Everybody's always going to be fighting it. And then some young kid said, what about, just going out and shooting our own stuff? This is maybe a year or 2 prior to, say, YouTube, right? Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, you can, but you're just going to be wasting your time.
Yeah.
Nobody's ever going to look at, I mean, yeah, that's, I was just completely wrong. So I'm always like, anytime the idea of me sort of giving advice to somebody, they've probably got stuff figured out that I may never figure out now. And I think there are so many different ways to come into the industry now. And I still do believe, like, really talented people, it still do kind of rise to the top, as much of a cliche as that is, right? And the stuff that isn't any good goes away. And there is still a meritocracy to it, which can be a beautiful thing. I think we've talked a little bit about how, Canada, there were times when it didn't always feel like such a meritocracy. But, it takes a hell of a lot to get anything made. And if you can do that, you're doing something right.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. I think, just doing these interviews over the years and seeing, especially, over the last 3-4, it seems like the job of a TV writer, you do best if you're willing to pivot and just adapt to the ways that the industry is shifting. I think a great example is the year 2015. Wasn't that long ago. Before that, there was no such thing as a streaming network. Now,
yeah, isn't that amazing?
Streaming networks have passed broadcast in terms of viewership, and that needle's not going backwards. And so I think the writers that I've seen do the worst are the ones that are still trying to hold on to the old model. The writers that I've seen do best are the ones that are quick on their feet and saying, "Okay, what do you want me to do now? Where can I take advantage of where things are right now?"
I think that's true. I think there's a lot of you have to have a lot of agility, but it's a reality. I was on the phone with a friend of mine just this morning, who's wrapping. He's been on a network show, and it's one of these kind of dwindling network jobs. But you when you talk about the piece of the pie or the size of the audience, when you're talking about 0.4s and 0.5s, ratings and all that, it's completely shifted now. Mm-hmm. There's a reason why I think network TV tends to still gear itself toward older viewers, because those are the folks obviously who are watching. So there's still that, but I think it's going away. I've often said, and I could be wrong, that within the next, sometimes I've said as little as 1 to 5, but let's say 5 to 10, it's almost unimaginable to me that networks will still continue to broadcast in a traditional kind of way with time slots and all that. Like, we're already so close to that almost just not being a thing anymore. Mm-hmm. And yes, you're right. That's exactly right. I moved down here in 2010, which feels like about 20 minutes ago, and And in many ways, the industry was completely different. And when that first show I worked on, Mad Love, it was a multi-camera for CBS with it was a good show. Jason Biggs and Sarah, really good cast. Sarah Chalk, Judy Greer was on that show, and also who am I forgetting? Oh, Tyler Labine, who's just doing who's wrapping the last season of New Amsterdam now. And geez, I can remember the day we premiered. We were still at work because we were still shooting when the first episode aired, and we were panicked because I think we did like a 3.1 or something. We're like, we're gonna get canceled, and we did get canceled. We did get canceled after 13 episodes. They're like, we can do better. Well, geez, nowadays, and that may have been true at the time.
Yeah, we got a 0.4.
Yeah, so I mean, it's completely changed. The only real piece of advice I could give anybody is to really, if there's something you want to create, or if you have an idea that you're just super excited about, figure out whatever way to get that, whether that's writing the script or going out and shooting it or just getting it in front of it, whatever it is. But just, it's got to be something that you're super excited about, because it'll just find the industry is always going to find a billion ways to break your heart. So the only thing you can really do is, if you're not enjoying the work, if the work isn't meaning something to you as just bringing you some joyful experience in the creation of it, in the imagining of it, you need that. That's the cornerstone of all of it, because the others, 9 times out of 10, all the other stuff doesn't happen. So just for one's own mental acuity, I think it just remember what drew you to it in the first place. And I mean that, we talked just a little bit about doing this kind of, I've been doing a sort of a podcast kind of show of my own on YouTube, and discovering just in the editing, doing the post of it, and finding how much I enjoy that, and losing hours to that in a way that I used to lose to writing, say 20 years ago, but I don't get as much of it anymore. Now, maybe, I don't know, that necessarily means a career change, but it is interesting that, I don't know. It's just, it really has to, everything is going to have its own frustration and heartbreak. So yeah, it's gotta be, you gotta do it because you really love doing it. Boy, that's a cliche, but it is true. It is true, because I know the difference. If I'm, I need to be, irrespective of whatever success of any one project, I want to be able to enjoy the doing of it. Yeah.
And this is the kind of thing that you can read about a lot, but you don't know until you do it how you're going to like it. My daughter has that experience. I told you off camera, she's in USC Screenwriting right now, and because she's been so laser focused on writing, she never thought about picking up a camera. But now she's in a production course as well, where she has to make short films, and she is loving it, like absolutely loving it, and doing great work. And they have to do a new short film every 2 weeks, and she's just hitting it out of the park. And she never would have known that if she didn't start doing it. And I think so especially as writers, we can spend a lot of time just spinning the wheels.
Yeah.
And not actually putting the pen to paper, not actually picking up the camera. And I think sometimes we just have to make that first step. I back in 2014, I went to a Comic-Con panel that was all about creativity, and that's one of the things they said is, put one word on the page and others will follow.
Right.
They literally said, put the quick brown fox jumps over lazy dogs, and then cross that out after you've written something else. And it's like the biggest thing that people can do is just start.
Yeah. There's a lot of wisdom in that. Yeah. Yeah. It's something I even still to this day need to be reminded of some days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So tell me more about the show you do on YouTube. What is that all about?
Just as I was had a little more time. Something had just fallen through earlier this year, and as I had a little more time on my hands than I wanted to, and I just thought, geez, I really want to just do something. I want to do something, and I had no real reason when I back before even we went to film school at York. Growing up in Scarborough for a couple of years, myself and a guy who was older than I was still a teenager. We had a little movie review show on public access TV, and I really enjoyed doing that. And for a long time really thought that broadcasting was sort of where I was maybe headed, and I was sort of disavowed of that notion a little bit when I realized that there weren't a lot of jobs to be like Dr. Johnny Fever on the radio or whatever. There was a lot of I remember doing one audition at one of the easy listening stations in town in Toronto, and they needed some late night person, and I went in and I had the audition, and I realized there was really all I was ever really going to be doing was playing the set playlist that had been out for me, and then give the temperature and the time every now and again, and that was it. I thought, well, this is really boring. But I always, and then when podcasts have been around now for however long people have been doing it, at least 15 some odd years, and always kind of thought about doing it just because I did get a kick out of it. And then just earlier this year, I just thought, oh, what the hell. And I got a couple of went on eBay and got a couple of digital old Sony 6000s and just kind of doing it on the cheap. But yeah, it's really fun. And in terms of talking to, I've realized just how many friends I have made in the industry, how many people that have meant a lot to me, and the people that I miss just chatting with. And so some of them would be faces people know well, some of them not so much. And obviously it depends on how a lot of folks are Canadian, but it was honest to God, it was as much about having an excuse just to catch up with people than anything else. Coming off of 2 years and 2.5 years of COVID and feeling like, yeah, just want to chat with people, just have it, you know what I mean? Just even, and if I can do it in person, then great. But I just Zooming with people that I've worked with back in, Colin Mockery and Deb McGrath, or I've had Mark McKinney on a couple of times, and people, and some people that I don't know very well. I just did Alana Harkin, who's just finished on Full Frontal of a TBS Sam B show, and Alana and I would have been knew I think a lot of the same people in the comedy scene in Toronto in the early 2000s around the Rivoli and stuff, but we'd never met. And that was really fun. So it's an opportunity to do that, because I don't, you get older. We live in, if the general topography of where you live is anything like where I live, you're in the suburbs, right? It's not like it being when you lived in Toronto and you had kind of a dense community of people around you, and you could look forward to running into people at the coffee shop or whatever. So anything that kind of gets me chatting with folks is fun for me, and I just kind of got a kick out of it. As to whether or not there's any future in it monetarily or anything else, that'll depend on who gives first. If I get bored, or we'll see.
Yeah, very cool. I'll put a link to the YouTube channel in the show notes.
Please do. I put a lot of work into it. I hope people will get a chance to check it out. It's fun.
Yeah, very cool. Well, we're going to start to wrap things up here, unless there's anything else you want to mention.
No, I feel like
grand statement.
I hope I haven't bored everybody to death. But no, it's great to it's funny. The more we chat, the more I'm feeling like I know we must have spent we do, because we know a lot of the same people, so we must have spent some time together. But then, of course, that was 30 years ago.
Too long ago.
Close to 30 years ago. So we could forgive ourselves if we can't remember any specific keg party. I don't think I ever went.
That pub you worked at, was it the Absinthe?
No, but the Absinthe was right around the corner, because actually I was a Winters student. I worked at the Maxwell, which was really more of a coffee shop in McLaughlin.
Yeah.
Remember that?
I never went to that one. I did work at the Absinthe, though.
Oh, you worked at the Absinthe.
Yeah.
Jeez, I'll bet you probably served me there. Yeah, that's where all my musician friends, because I had a lot of friends who were in the music program, and yeah, we would go in, go in there and hoist sometimes. And back then, of course, you could smoke everywhere, and we'd go in there and just smoke and smoke and smoke and smoke and smoke.
Wow.
What a time to be alive.
Cool.
No, I
so you're
yeah.
The Rob. Oh, sorry. What was that?
Oh no, I was just remembering all the other pubs on the York campus. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, and the new ones. Have you ever been back? That campus
I have not been back. No.
Oh, so different now. So different now.
I'll bet it is. When was the last time you were there?
My daughter had a ballet recital in I want to say 2008-ish.
Okay.
And actually, it would have been later than that. It was, but maybe 2012. And wow, looks totally different. Totally built up, tons of new buildings.
I'd really kind of love to walk around actually, and next time I'm in Toronto, maybe I'll make an effort to do that because I just curious. Yeah, I've seen photos of it where, I mean, the newest building when you and I were there was Very Hall, right?
Yeah,
and that was quite lovely at the time, and I suspect there's a lot more construction since then.
Yeah, I have a funny story about Very Hall. Statute of limitations, I'm probably okay. When it was just being built, we were shooting this sci-fi film, and so we got permission to go and shoot in one of the classrooms, and we had this clever idea. We're going to shoot lasers, and we would put cardboard, and then the charge, and then a painting, so that the charge could explode through the painting.
Oh, okay.
And that was all well and good, except we forgot that heat rises, and so the charge went off and it goes up above it, and so when you take off, well, first of all, in the film footage, you can it explodes beautifully, and then you see me jump into the shot to put it out. And so we take off the cardboard, and you can see the line of the cardboard, everything clean underneath, and then this smoky thing on the wall.
Oh my God,
we were
hilarious.
so lucky. They were still painting, and they offered to just paint that room again.
Oh.
I mean, we could have been in big trouble for that.
Yeah, right. Well, you're still a free man, so no one's arrested you for arson yet.
Yeah. So you're the Rob Sheridan on Twitter?
I think so. Is that right? I don't know. I don't remember. I lost my account at one point. I started. Yeah. I think I am the Rob.
and if anybody wants to reach out to you, what's the best way? Are you on? Is Instagram better? Twitter?
Instagram. Yeah, Instagram is good. I'm on Instagram. Well, my screen name is Up All Night with Bob, which is the name of my little show. And then, that's my. Is that my nickname or my screen name? Could I sound like an older person? Let's see here. What the hell is my name here? Oh, Rob. Oh, well, Rob Sheridan. Oh, I guess that's it. Rob Sheridan. What is my...
Perfect.
Oh, Up All Night with Bob.
Up All Night with Bob. I'll make sure these are in the show notes.
Thank you.
Well, it's been great catching up. Appreciate you taking this time, and great reconnecting about old times, too.
Yeah. Nice to chat with you. I'll come knock on your door next time we're coming up to Six Flags.
Very cool. Thanks so much, Rob.
All right, take it easy.
Cool, okay. You too. That's it for the episode. You can find us on the web at tvwriterpodcast.com or at scriptmag.com. The video version of this podcast is available at iTunes, Podbean, or YouTube. The audio-only version is available at iTunes, Podbean, Spotify, or Pandora. You can find me on Instagram at tvwriterpodcast. Follow me on Twitter, @GrayJones is my handle. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.